Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Cath, and also Andy for your presentation. So now we have a few minutes for the first Q&A session. I think I will share my screen to show the questions that have come in. And I think we can say that some of them have already been addressed in the further end of the presentation, so that's good. That leaves us with less questions to deal with. And also some will be addressed in later presentations. So I'll just pick a few to see, to get some answers now, and then we can move on to the last two presentations. So I think two important ones are, do we have any indication that high cardiovascular fitness, for example, big lung volume, a very fit, well-trained person, has a higher risk of being a super spreader, basically, producing much more virus copies?
So I don't think we do. I think they might have a higher chance of being a super spreader if they are regularly in a poorly ventilated gym doing high aerobic activities. But beyond that, I don't think there's any relationship that we know of between their ability to produce aerosols compared to somebody else's ability to produce aerosols. The more I think about indoor fitness, the more I think it's absolutely madness as a species that we run indoors and we ride bicycles indoors. Perhaps we should stick to yoga indoors and weights and do the other stuff outdoors from now on.
Well, from personal experience, I can say that there's a lot of breathing going on during yoga as well. But going for maybe another question that I think bridges a bit the two presentations is there a risk that higher ventilation rates actually increase the risk of COVID transmission by increasing the transport of the infected aerosols from one person to the other? So maybe Cath first, and then Andy can come in for a second opinion.
In some cases, possibly, but I think what we have to remember is the higher, it's not so much about the ventilation rate, it's more about the directionality of flow. So a directional flow could move something from one place to another, but we also have to remember that high ventilation rate will also increase the dilution at the same time. So I think I would be, I mean, I think it's possible, and I think we might see some scenarios where it happens, but on the whole, I would be far more worried about, in the pecking order of things, I would put get your ventilation rates up over anything else.
Great. Andy, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Well, the only additional thought that I have is, I mean, this is an important time to distinguish between ventilation in terms of air delivery to the space, which can be very effective in diluting what's happening in the space, and outdoor air ventilation. And, you know, if you have an infected individual in a space, it almost doesn't matter, you know, whether it's outdoor air or supply air coming in, unless the building's just full of infected people. But it's a distinction between ventilation in terms of dilution and ventilation in terms of air movement and air delivery. But you know, I think Cath's answer was right on target.
Perfect, thanks. So then, as I said, there are some questions that have been addressed during the presentation. You both spoke about the influence of relative humidity on the survival of the virus and of the particles. So they basically evaporate until about half their size. Then you also addressed the fact that there is no good information on a dose response function at the moment. So the approach that is often used is quanta, which is like an abstract form of getting a critical dose, but yeah, the values are very different from different studies, in orders of magnitude different. And also questions that were addressed to Andy, actually, will be addressed in the presentation by Ali Reza, where he will focus on inter-room airflows. So indeed, how pressurization of different rooms can impact the transmission between the different spaces. And also that was already evoked, there is some evidence in hotels that there is transmission from room to room based on leakage between the spaces. Okay, we're out of time for this Q&A session, so I propose we go to the next two talks before we open the floor again for questions. Again, please put them in the Q&A section of the WebEx event and address them to all speakers so we can process them like this. And with that, I would like to hand over the floor to Roberto Traversari for his talk about field measurements of aerosol exposure.